Okay, welcome everyone to sequencing call number 16. This is the very first of 2025. Happy New Year, everyone. I think 2025 will be a very, very big year for base rollups. What I want to do before we have people present is give a very, very quick update on some of the things that have happened in the last couple months. So let me just share a couple slides, and then we'll get going with the presentations. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that we've had a sequencing week in Chiang Mai. It was a huge success, in my opinion. We had about 50 different people from, I think, 30 different teams come together. We made, I think, a ton of progress at the social layer because everyone got to meet in person, spend quality time. We did this caving here on the very first day to get to know each other, and then we worked for 4 days. And these are some of the topics that we worked on. If you'd like to kind of dive into one of these topics, I've shown the various team leads for each of those that you can go contact. Now, the other very quick update that I want to give is basically a refreshed version of this slide, the base ecosystem. And really, there's been a lot of changes, I guess, at the base rollup first line here. So we have now finally 2 base rollups that are in production. Tygo has been for several months, and Facet has been for several days or maybe a couple of weeks. And what I'm expecting to happen is that in 2025, there's going to be maybe 6, maybe more base rollups that will reach mainnet. And then there's some of the updates here that I want to talk about. The ones that are new maybe to you are those that are in yellow here, the 5 of them. So the first one that I want to talk about was when announced at DEF CON, Namechain. They haven't made any kind of public commitment on what type of sequencer they want to go with, but in my personal opinion, the only thing that really makes sense for Namechain is to launch as a base rollup. I think they want to launch towards the end of 2025, so they have a lot of time to flesh out the exact design that they want to go with. They are partnering with Linea to reuse some of their ZK stack, and we'll see how that evolves. The other name that I've added to the slide here, and actually it was previously hidden behind the stars emoji here, so this is a bit of a reveal, is Scroll. Scroll is working on this based rollup SDK, and I think they're trying to basically have the SDK be as much of a public good as possible. They haven't made an announcement, but they have given me permission to disclose this here to this group. So if you're interested in working on SDKs for base rollups, do go ahead and ping them. And we've also have a new rollup that I'm still keeping secret for now, which is potentially interested in becoming based. And then on the, I've added a new category here, pillars, people who are basically interested in pilling other teams to go build base rollups. One of them is Etherealize, which is a very new team, and basically their focus is specifically institutional people. So for institutions, the pitch for base rollups is relatively simple, which is that it's maximum security, maximum credible neutrality. You don't have a choke point, which could be a regulatory choke point. It's as close to the metal as possible, and for a lot of big institutions that are moving very, very large amounts of money, what they're trying to do is basically reduce the settlement times from 1 day or multiple days down to a few minutes or a few seconds. And for them, the fact that base rollups have a 12-second native block time is not at all an issue. And then there's a final project here, which I think more details will be made public in the near future, is called Based, and it's kind of this play on word. It's a temporary name. But just to let you know that there's yet another team that is forming out there, and what they're trying to do, I think, is to focus on the public goods aspect of based infrastructure, trying to have a stack which is as much as possible a public good, and trying to encourage maybe as well some public good based rollups to be launched in parallel to some of the more commercial rollup. So overall, a lot of exciting things that are happening, and again, I'm hoping that 2025 will be a big year for base rollups. Okay, with that said, I'm going to stop the sharing and open up the floor to the folks from Facet. We have the two co-founders and also the very first employee from Facet. So that's Tom and Michael, co-founders, and Jeremy, the first employee. And I think we're going to have Tom present today. So Tom, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Tom Lehman, one of the two co-founders, as just mentioned. I'm here to give you a quick intro on Facet. First, am I okay here? I'm not screen sharing, but you can see my video. This is fine. Okay, it's fine. So Facet is the second based rollup, as Justin mentioned, but being based is kind of a piece with our overall strategy here, the overall idea, which is to be a rollup that can withstand hard times. We're going to talk about that and also the based aspect specifically. So we're going to talk about first, why do we exist? What's the point of any of this? Now, of course, how it does work and arguments against Facet. Okay, why is Facet bad? Why shouldn't you use Facet? We're going to have Q&A. So starting with why Facet exists. So I think these tweets by Vitalik are a pretty good framework. So Vitalik raises this idea of good times and hard times, and how the L1 has to withstand hard times, and how L2s can build for good times. They don't have to withstand hard times necessarily. Later clarified, the operative word is can, so L2s don't have to build for good times. And we think it would be good to have some L2s that are built to withstand hard times. And our question is, could you have an L2, a roll-up in this case, that is as resilient in hard times as the L1 is, as Vitalik wants the L1 to be? So let's explore this. So what are hard times? Well, hard times are when everyone turns against you, basically. It's when trust assumptions break down, times of great stress, people are getting hacked, and so, a lot of bad things can happen. But one bad thing that we can explore, a really bad thing, would be a hostile government or another powerful party trying to stop a roll-up, right? Trying to stop all user-initiated transactions, deposits, withdrawals, every activity that is happening on the roll-up. So how might this happen, and how can we defend against this? So what do you want to do if you're the hostile government? So the first thing you want to do is get the admin keys of the roll-up. Okay, by admin keys, I mean the set of signatures required to do everything that is possible to do with the roll-up's L1 smart contracts. So, mess with the bridge, mess with all the functionality. And in practice, this turns out to be about 15 signatures for the most secure roll-ups, like OP mainnet, the stage 1 roll-ups, and it's less for others. One interesting thought experiment is the number of unique signatures required to shut down every roll-up, which is definitely less than number of roll-ups times about 15. But you want to get the admin keys, and it's kind of a loose notion that changes per roll-up, but it's the number of signatures that are required, a number of individual people that have to sign. And so if you have that on an optimistic roll-up, at least on OP, and this is analogous to other roll-ups, you can switch the sequencer to the zero address. Okay, so you switch the sequencer, and now the sequencer, centralized sequencer here, is not sequencing user transactions, and so the roll-up is paused, right? Can't do it. But then, of course, we have this notion of forced inclusion. So maybe people can get around the sequencer using a special technique and still get their transactions in. Okay, but actually we know now, due to this great article, at least this is what introduced me to it, just the extent to which forced inclusion just doesn't work, right? Because if you are trying to accomplish something that has contentious state, like withdrawing from a protocol that requires certain preconditions, like there being enough liquidity, the sequencer can sandwich you and prevent you from achieving your goals, even if you're using forced inclusions. This is a big issue, basically, the handoff problem. Recommend people read this article. I'm sure many have. So, okay, forced inclusion doesn't work. So now what about base sequencing? We bring in base sequencing. This is way better than forced inclusion because there is no power that has monopoly over sequencing around the forced inclusion, so it can control, the sandwiching. So base sequencing is absolutely necessary, but then you have this question, is it sufficient? Okay, do we need more? Okay, well, it's not sufficient in the case that the base sequencing aspect of a rollup can be disabled by the very same admin keys that were just compromised. Okay, so the admin wants to shut down all transactions. Okay, the admin that's compromised. Base sequencing says, no, we're going to actually prevent that because we have a way that, we can submit transactions without any permissions. But then the admin says, okay, I'll flip off base sequencing. And so this is possible. This is, the way it works in, Tyco. I think Tyco is an amazing pioneering rollup that was first and led the way. But I think this is a part of their, design that I would disagree with, which is, if we say base sequencing, if we say a rollup has base sequencing, what do we mean? Do we mean that it, as of the very last time we checked, was using base sequencing, or do we mean it's baked into the protocol itself and can't be changed? And so I think that's kind of the question here. So it's really not about base sequencing in the way we use it. It's about the power of admin keys. Okay, so if you have 15 signatures that can shut off transactions, this is a problem. But we have this other notion called stage 2, which is, hey, don't worry so much about OP mainnet today. They're making great progress, and I believe they are. They make great progress, but still they're not there. But what about when all these rollups reach stage 2? Are we going to improve the rollup admin keys situation? Because if we are, why criticize this? Let's just wait, basically, and let progress roll on. So stage 2 does not change this fundamental tension, this fundamental issue. What it does do is it says you have to give users 30 days notice before you shut down the rollup. And this is from L2Beat's Medium article. They lay it out here. They describe it as an ample time frame. I love L2Beat. Like, they're the only ones out there basically doing anything like this, talking about this in a rigorous way. So I don't want to pick on them at all, but I think it's worth asking the question, okay, is it an ample time frame? What do we mean when we say that? How good is 30 days notice? How excited should we be when stage 2 rolls around because of what it gives us here in terms of a notice period? So looking at this now, we can ask the question, well, what happens? Okay, the hostile government does their hacking, they get in there and they trigger a shutdown, but because it's stage 2, we have 30 days. So what literally happens in this case? Well, first, the happy news, of course, is the EOA-held bridged assets get out. So we're talking about base sequencing here, right? We can't be a base sequencing, it can't be turned off. So users can force their transactions and get their EOA-held bridged assets out. And that's the great thing about stage 2, and that is a great thing. If we can achieve stage 2, it's great. On the other hand, native assets, everything that doesn't have a corresponding state in the L1 that you can kind of withdraw into, all these assets go to 0, which sucks. Meme coins, maybe we don't care about meme coins, NFTs, the Xcopy NFT on Base, right? Like things that people might actually value, they go to 0, which is unfortunate. And then we have contract-held bridge assets. So here we have black and white up here, EOA-held bridged assets and all native assets. Contract-held bridged assets, assets that are bridgeable but not held by a user. And so what happens to them? Well, it depends on the logic of the contract, right? Because these contracts are, Turing-complete systems. And so, we can't predict what's going to happen. So I think a good starting point might be to illustrate it with this contract. So this is a very simple time lock contract, right? This contract allows the creator to lock up value. Okay, so you, in the constructor here, you send in some value. it remains in the contract, and it sets a locked until date to now plus 31 days, and then you can withdraw it once that is passed. So in the rollout in the shutdown of this rollup that we're talking about, unfortunately, these funds are lost, right? Because you can't withdraw them for 31 days, and all transactions are being shut down in 30 days. So we have this kind of bizarre situation where, you get to stage 2, which is the one that we're all shooting for, and now you can't really write this contract, right? Like, you can write it, but it's not going to function as intended, because, functionality of this contract doesn't say anything about the L2 shutting down, doesn't say anything about it getting hacked, it doesn't say anything about anything. It's just it just expresses a very simple kind of relationship here. So we would expect this to not depend on things outside of the contract, just as it would on the L1. Okay, and so again, to emphasize here, we're talking about rollups that withstand hard times. Can we do it as well as the L1? And quite obviously, the L1 can lock a token for 30 days, as long as anyone still believes, in Ethereum, and anyone wants to follow the protocol. And if we are pursuing a rollup strategy that's trying to scale the L1, and we can't do that in our strategy, then maybe there's a problem if we are really worried about hard times, right? In good times, maybe it doesn't matter. So what are the solutions here? So obviously Facet is a solution, wouldn't be here, but there are other solutions. So one solution is stage 3, right? We invent a new stage, and we really double down on everything that works in stage 2 and amplify it. So one thing we say is it's got to be based, right? Because forced inclusion in hard times doesn't work well enough for us. And the other thing we say is really we're going past any sort of notion of signatures or admins. Really, there's got to be some kind of structure called a DAO where we can just define the behavior of the rollup as the will of this structure. So if the rollup shuts down, then that's actually fine. And if people lose money, then that's actually fine, because the way this is set up is it's the will of the DAO. And so we just make the DAO really expensive to attack. And if the DAO gets attacked, then we say, well, that is what it is. And so depending on the cost to attack this DAO, this can be pretty darn secure. This is not a bad solution. It solves some of the problems we talked about before. But we're still not doing as well in hard times as the L1, and it's not coming, now. It's going to take a little while to get to stage 2, let alone stage 3. We also have enshrined rollups, right? This is a major topic in itself, but the core element here is that you can have an enshrined rollup, and this is how I think they're supposed to work, where there are no L1 contracts to attack. So, there's no way to attack the system aside from proposing a fork, getting people to go to your fork, resisting a fork fixing a bug, and that's generally like a lot harder than doing something with admin keys. It's always a lot harder. So you get the full L1 security, and these are great, but when are they coming, right? 1 year out, 3 years out, 5 years out, we don't know. A lot of things have to happen between now and then. I actually didn't know what number to put here because you have to have a lot of context in the Ethereum roadmap, but I put 3. And then once they're here, it's obviously hard to iterate because everything has to be tied up in, the L1 roadmap. And so it raises these questions about, okay, what is the role of the L1? Do we want the L1 to take over all of this, or do we want the L1 to focus on the things that only the L1 can do? So another great solution. Again, though, not here. So now we have Facet. So Facet's got one really big thing going for it here, which is it exists today, and it's impossible to shut off. So if you want something that is out there today that can be used today on mainnet and can implement a 31-day time lock smart contract on EVM, there is literally one option, right? So in 3 years, 1 year, there might be other options, but for now, there is one option. And so, this is not free. There are downsides to Facet, and we're going to talk about those. But if you are singularly focused on being impossible to shut off and existing, you have no other choice. So what is Facet? Okay, so this is a little bit, there's some words here. This is like a little bit of like a breakdown of the specific labeling and details of Facet. Then we're going to talk about how it works from a normal standpoint. But for this audience, I wanted to make sure how we get into the details. So what is Facet? So Facet is a based sovereign rollup. So it has the word based in there. That's recognizable. There is another base rollup. There are many base rollups planned. Sovereign, a little weirder. You don't see that really that often when it comes to Ethereum rollups. And then, rollup you see, but is actually a little bit, there are different definitions of rollup. We're going to get into that. So Facet is a rollup. So when we say rollup, we mean something very specific. We mean an Ethereum rollup is a blockchain whose state is derived by applying a state transition function, STF, to Ethereum's transaction history. So if you have that, you have a rollup. And rollups are desirable because anyone can know the state of a rollup without any external information aside from the Ethereum L1 and without using and just with using software that is source available or open source that they can get. So there's never any dispute about what the state of a rollup is because it only relies on decentralized information and deterministic software. So that's what we say when we mean a rollup. L2beat means something a little different, which we're going to see on the next slide. Another way to look at this is we use Ethereum for DA. Like a rollup, an Ethereum rollup uses Ethereum for DA. Facet is based. So, of course, a base rollup is a rollup where rollup blocks can be permissionlessly included in L1 blocks. So there is no one with more power than anyone else, no gatekeeper, and anyone can propose blocks, help create blocks. And so this is super important. You can't be resilient against hard times with a centralized sequencer, even with forced inclusion. So in kind of another way to look at this is we use Ethereum for sequencing, right? When you're looking at the big picture rollup thing. And then finally, kind of the curveball one, right? Facet is sovereign. A sovereign rollup is a rollup without a canonical bridge, without, in our case, and I think this might be true overall, without any enshrined L1 contracts. In other words, enshrined here meaning recognized by the protocol as special and playing a role in the protocol itself. So the Facet world, the Facet ecosystem has smart contracts, bridges, and so forth. But all of those are equal in the eyes of the protocol. There's no special smart contracts. And we think this is like a super important thing because special smart contracts, you have to upgrade them, and then who has the keys, to do that. So no canonical bridge, right, means that there is no special bridge, but it does not mean that there are no validating bridges. To the contrary, any number of validating bridges can exist, and they can have the exact same security level as any normal rollups canonical bridge in terms of proofs, in terms of literal code, as we'll see. So this is not a question of the role bridges play. It's does anyone have a monopoly on bridges? So STF is enforced by social consensus, meaning that no one has any power to make you use version 1 or 2 or 5 of Facet or any sovereign rollup. It's just like the L1 in this way. And then finally, reiterating this, users can validate the state by running their own full node. And there are other ways to do that, again, using proofs and so forth, but the baseline way, the thing that the proofs are trying to get to, is what happens when you execute a full node, which anyone can do. So I mentioned this a moment ago, what is a rollup? I told you our definition, but I just want to emphasize for clarity here, we are a rollup, but we're not a stage N rollup, according to L2beat. And so let's look at why that is. So what are the criteria for being stage 0, for being a rollup at all? Well, first criteria, this one's pretty easy. We nailed it. The project has to call itself a rollup. Okay, so we do that. The inputs for the STF are posted, state transition function are posted to Ethereum L1. So we do that as well. A source available node exists that can recreate the state. Yes, we have that. And we agree that these are the criteria, but L2beat has one more, which is state roots are posted to the Ethereum L1. And so we don't do this, although we actually do. Facet, the company, actually posts state roots, but that is an activity that we're doing because we want to, not because the protocol, requires it, which gets to this idea of how, sovereign rollups allow all these great things, but they don't enforce it because they don't want to have privilege surrounding it. So anyone can go to Base or OP mainnet and start posting state roots, and 100 different people can do that on their own Oracle. And likewise, for Facet, anyone can do that, but it's not part of the protocol. And the reason for this is that we don't think it's good to wrap up bridge security, which is what state roots are fundamentally about, with rollup security. when you do that, bridge security is harder, right? You don't want to, it has some necessary elements of privilege in it. And when you give the bridge controller, the canonical bridge controller, power over the whole rollup, you end up amplifying the power of the bridge controller to a point where they can jeopardize the big picture. So we're trying to separate them, and that's why we don't do this or anything else that's related to a protocol recognized official bridge. Okay, how does Facet actually literally work? Okay, so the first most important thing to understand about Facet is an optimism fork. So we looked at Optimism, and we looked at other things too. Optimism's the best. Optimism's amazing software. We love Optimism. And so we looked at Optimism. We said, what do we have to modify in Optimism to get the results that we want? And so if things look familiar, then that is intentional. And the reason that we try to keep as much familiar as possible is so it's familiar to developers and users. So it's an Optimism fork. To create a Facet transaction, you send an Ethereum transaction to this inbox address. Okay, so this is different from the usual conception of a base rollup. And we'll get to like kind of how we're going to maybe evolve this or definitely involve this in some ways, but just like the baseline level, this is a very enforced inclusion type idea. In other words, instead of a full Facet block being proposed at once in a blob or call data, whatever, individual users propose their own transactions one at a time, much as in the forced inclusion case. Okay, now you have to pay for gas to do this, and this rollup needs a native currency. All blockchains, all EVM blockchains need it, and so we have a bridgeless native currency called Facet Compute Token that is necessary to buy compute. And then finally, we have the support for optimistic bridges built by anyone. And so really what this means is we have the classic L2 to L1 message passer pre-deploy on the L2 side, which is sort of the easy Optimism built-in way to kind of do, proofs. So you don't have to prove the whole state, you prove the state of this contract and so forth. So that's the big picture. Here are some details. Okay. You start with an Ethereum transaction. All right, and so what you do to create a Facet transaction is you create your Facet transaction object, which includes only a few fields, right? We don't need other fields on this. And we take this transaction object, we put in this envelope, which is the Ethereum transaction. So the call data of Ethereum transaction is the RLP encoding of that Facet transaction, including the transaction type, gets sent to the inbox burn address. And the from on the Facet transaction, when it's interpreted by the node, will be the from implied by the signature of the person who signed the Ethereum transaction. Okay, and this is how EOAs create Facet transactions. Contracts can do them. And we'll see an example of that in a moment. So here's how it works. So once the transactions are sent, go to this Facet inbox. Okay, now they're in an L1 block. So this is up here, this has nothing to do with Facet. This is just how the L1 works. You can send transactions. But now our Facet node fetches these transactions that were in this L1 block using, get block by number and get transaction, get block receipts, normal RPC stuff, and then builds blocks by extracting the Facet transactions that are in the L1 block, builds blocks, and then sends it to Facet Geth, which is a Geth instance using the engine API, and the Geth instance, computes the state of the blockchain and the history and so forth. And this is very similar to Optimism. Facet Geth is a fork of OP Geth. Facet Node is not a fork of OP Node, but it probably should be. Maybe we're going to try, there's some details about why we couldn't do that, but ideally it would be a fork of OP Node. It's very, very, very similar, and I'm trying to keep it that way. And then finally, users can query data from Facet Geth just as it were any other RPC endpoint, any read function, get whatever you want to get from that. You can't write using that RPC endpoint. You can only write by sending these L1 transactions. So this is kind of the flow of how it works. So if you go to our docs, you can see this part of the docs, which is how to run a node. And so the key here is, again, everyone thinking about rollups, whether it's us, L2B, we all agree you need a source available node. And that's what this is. So if you want to get the Facet state at any time, guaranteed, 100% guaranteed. You go to, you clone this repo and you run Docker Compose. And you have to add your L1 RPC, which is, part of the theory here, right? You need an L1 RPC, but that's it. You need the software, L1 RPC, you're done. It will work every time. So just to emphasize that anyone can, do this. So now we have this question, what about gas? Because on normal rollups, the gas token is bridged Ether. And we don't have, you can have bridged Ether, but it won't be the native token, right? You can't have that, because if you have that, then you need one bridge to be special in the eyes of the protocol, and we can't have that. So we need a different gas mechanism. And so the way this works is basically when you create your facet transaction, when you're putting something in the call data, you can put this amount in the call data, a little bit, or you can put a lot. So this would be maybe the example of a contract being deployed on facet, right? So you have a bunch of bytecode there. Here you have less. And then you take the call data size, gas units, you multiply it by the FCT mint rate, which is dynamic, and you get out your FCT mint. So if you have 100 gas units and the rate is 2.6 million GUI per unit, you get 0.003 FCT. And then after that, you will burn a portion of that, because you need to you need to pay for your facet transaction, which burns FCT, and you'll be left over with a balance. This is very similar to how Optimism handles paying for deposit transactions, which are also paid for using L1 gas, but we have various differences here, most notably that you can maintain a balance of FCT, which is not possible in the Optimism case, and the purpose for that is for future being able to pay for batching and so forth. So we have this. What about bridging? So I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, so I don't want to get too far into the bridging thing, because this is by design not meant to be interesting. This is just us saying we do it. You can build a perfect copy of an Optimism bridge on Facet and work in the exact same way. So I'm not going to go through this. This is how deposit works. This is a quick shot of how you send transactions from a smart contract. Let me keep it moving. This is how deposits work, withdrawals work, state roots, everything. We don't have fault proofs right now, because that's more modifications you have to do to Optimism's system. But we're going to get to that. But yeah, withdrawals, complicated process, the exact same way Optimism works. You can build the exact same bridge. It'll all work in the same way. The only difference is no one has a monopoly, and the gas token is not bridged. Okay, so what is on the what's on the roadmap here? So number one most important thing from a user standpoint is we need a way to send transactions that is not so expensive, right? If you're sending a transaction on Facet in an Ethereum transaction, it's going to cost you $1 instead of $15, whatever it costs on the L1, but people are used to less than a cent. And so you have to take things down a lot. So, how can we do batching? The main idea we have here is to share it as much as possible. In other words, users should be able to hitchhike on any batch, in addition to any formal sharing arrangement that we create on a protocol level. You should be able to put your transaction in a batch on Base. And, maybe there's a time delay there, of course, but that's what you want to do. That should be recognized as part of Facet. You should put something in a Tyco batch. You should put something in any batch that makes it. And then, but the final thing is we want to preserve this forced inclusion thing we have today, where any user, without creating a blob or type 3, anything like this, any user can just get the transaction in. Fault proofs. So this is an engineering challenge, but not conceptually difficult. Just changing the way, stealing Optimism's amazing work, basically, and using it and changing it. Notably, though, we can share settlement with other rollups, other base rollups. There's no reason why someone couldn't be involved in proofs on Facet and other rollups that have a bridge that does both. Again, there's no monopoly when it comes to the bridging aspect, so anyone is on equal footing to build the best bridge. Arguments against Facet. Without an enshrined bridge, how do you know who to trust? Right? You go to use Base, you got to trust Coinbase. That's it. You say, boop, trusting Coinbase at the door, and then you don't have to worry once you're in there. That's like a waiver you have to sign. And there's something nice about that. You know it up front. With Facet and with the Ethereum L1, you don't know who to trust. You want USDT. Well, they're unaudited and they have a problem. But what about USDC? I actually heard that they halted withdrawals because of the Silicon Valley Bank thing. You have to figure it out, and it's annoying. And so if you want to get something as unstoppable as the L1, you need to take on this negative aspect of every user basically having to figure this out. But we think the trade-off is worth it in hard times. So another question is like, you're going to have some too big to fail bridge, and you're not really fixing that problem because your too big to fail bridge is going to be the same as Coinbase. Not to pick on Coinbase here, just any example. It's going to be the same as any other rollups enshrined bridge. Once it's too big to fail, it's going to have a ton of power, and its security is going to drive the rollup security. And we agree, right? Even on the L1, this is the case. If you want to fork the L1 and Circle opposes you, you are going to have a really tough time doing that. And that's how it is on Facet, and that's also how it is on any normal rollup. If the most powerful person says, play by these rules, you have to. Also, the powerful person can lose the money or steal the money. But what a bridge can't do is stop the chain using admin keys, right? We've given that to bridges in normal rollups. They don't, by default, you don't get that. Circle doesn't get an admin key. Vitalik doesn't get an admin key, right? No one has an admin key on the L1, and we've given this to bridges. And also, bridges don't get a monopoly, right? Bridges have to fight, but we've given them a monopoly in the normal L2 case. So this is an accurate criticism in that there will be not everyone will be equal, just like the L1, but I think there's real differences that make it not the case that bridge security and rollup security are the same. Do users want Ether as a native currency? Probably, right? FCT, I don't want another token. I don't care about this. Unfortunately, we can't do it. But yes, this is a downside. You have to do a different thing than you do on every other rollup in the L1. But there's no way around it, given our architecture. And finally, this whole, we call it atomic-based sequencing, where you send individual transactions, and that is assembled later into the block. It's expensive and confusing. You don't want to connect your MetaMask and send call data garbage to a garbage address. That's not like what we expect from MetaMask. We expect it to show us a preview of what our assets are going to do. So this is a mess right now, basically. And again, we think it's worth it because of the benefits of being unstoppable, but it's going to be a big problem for wider adoption. So we need to get we need to get the batches to work. So this is definitely a very valid criticism. There are probably other arguments against Facet, but I want to open it up to Q&A. So thank you all for listening to this portion.
Amazing. Thank you, Tom, so much for the presentations. I've even had someone DM me privately saying this talk is amazing. It should be public, and it will be public on the Preconfirmation and Sequencing YouTube playlist.
Awesome.
I guess one of the more of a comment than a question. You mentioned the enshrined rollups. One of the things here is that we've renamed them to native rollups. And today, actually, we had the very first native rollup call. So it's a series of calls similar to this one. It's being led by Matthew from Spire. If you're interested in joining the native rollup call and Telegram group, do send me a message.
Oh yeah, will do. So what do you think? You're the, because I was trying to guess, and what's the correct way to give this slide in this part here? How many years out is it, so I can have a good slide? Yeah, that's a great question. So if you had asked me a week ago, I would have said something like 3 years. But if you ask me today, I would say something closer to 2 years, maybe potentially the Fusaka fork in 2026. And the reason is that we realized that there's a way to deploy a version of native rollups that doesn't depend on snarks. So just like proto-dank sharding is kind of faking it by asking all of the validators to download all of the blobs as opposed to doing data availability sampling, we can have the validators fake native rollups, kind of do it the naive way by just re-executing the state transitions. And the main constraint here is that
we would need a fairly small gas limit. So we wouldn't have the amazing scalability benefits of Snarks, but at least we would have native rollups for people to get comfortable with and play with and start familiarizing themselves with. And this small limit would basically correspond to the 6 blob per block limit that we have there. Cool. One of the things that I'm hoping to do is basically hire someone full-time at the Ethereum Foundation to lead the roll-up effort and shepherd it and accelerate it. So if I am successful in doing that, and I do have some candidates in mind, then yeah, hopefully 2026 is kind of the earliest possible fork where it could come in.
Awesome. I'll update the slide and I'll change the name. Very cool. Any questions? Thank you in the chat. I do see the handoff problem has been dropped in the chat. I think really completely obvious in retrospect in a way, but like super eye-opening when I first read that. I was just like, whoa, like we are in trouble right now with this whole centralized sequencing thing. So highly recommend that.
Orest, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this is one of the many validating bridges not becoming the de facto enshrined bridge at some point thing or like outlook. And I'm wondering, could you describe, for instance, for assets such as stable coins, how fungibility would work and like how this scenario might play out?
Sure. So maybe jumping back to the bridge slides. So if you look at like the players on this slide, you see L1 standard bridge and L2 standard bridge, right? And so if you try to bridge on an optimistic and an OP rollup, you will see these same contracts. And L1 standard bridge will be, controlled by the admins, controlled by the protocol, and it will be the one that everyone is directed to use. But the same exact code can be deployed by anyone. So for example, in the stablecoin case, Circle, if it wanted to, could deploy the same exact code and say, here's the USDC bridge, and it's the same exact code, but the L1 standard bridge supports all ERC20 tokens in one bridge, and so no reason to do that because the standard bridge always gets all these benefits anyway. So this would be the criticism of Facet. You'd say, well, if it's chaos, then there are going to be 6 bridges that are USDC, and they're all going to be incompatible tokens on Facet, and that's bad. And you could say, well, would they be incompatible? Maybe there would be ways to make them compatible, but I think more likely the answer would be someone would emerge. There's network effects here, obviously, and so someone would emerge as the best one or the best 2 or 3, and they would fight it out. So USDT and USDC on LBL1 are not totally fungible, although you can make that work using DeFi. And that's how it would work on Facet. And the hope will just be you will have the right number of these things where, you don't maybe have one really huge monopoly, but you don't have 500 people. And that's kind of like the question really is how to see it play out. But the overall idea is you pay a huge price for giving someone a monopoly, a huge price. And so, that's the choice. Do you want to get that convenience at that huge price, or do you want to pay our price, which is not 0, to get, the equality type? I don't know. Does that help?
So I guess you're saying, let's say bridge stablecoins are not fungible with one another anyway. So why not accept fragmenting the liquidity a bit more and having different versions of bridge tokens in exchange for an oligopoly rather than a monopoly? Is that the trade-off you are striking?
I wouldn't necessarily say in exchange for an oligopoly. I'm more so just pointing out like the way it works on the L1, given the same preconditions, basically, where on the L1 there's no enshrined or chosen or monopoly given, granted provider of any Stablecoin and bridging is not the same exactly than having real world assets, so it's not exactly the same, of course. But given those initial conditions, we can see how it played out in the L1 and draw conclusions from that. And so I'm proposing, like, you can kind of draw conclusions. It's the best shot we have at predicting how something like this might work. And I'm saying, if that happens, it is still better than there being a monopoly. But beyond that, it's better than sorry, I'm reading the chat there. It's better than giving the bridge controller, so much power, right? Where, the admin on the L2 controls the bridge, and that is connected to controlling whether or not you can even send a transaction at all. But
one could argue one takeaway from the L1 world and the rollup centric roadmap is that the fragmentation is already too large. And I see Greg just dropped a message in the chat, I think reiterating exactly that. Like different bridges, even connecting the same two chains, are inherently non-fungible as in security parameters. So how would this not fragment the spectrum even more?
Right. So I think the fragmentation. Yeah, I think the fragmentation is a great question. I think right now we see tremendous fragmentation, today, where there are a million different versions of USDC because there are a million rollups. And so each version on each rollup is different. It's not the same. It's not fungible because the security situation on these different rollups is different. Who signs, whether they have a DAO, it's different. Different bridge security means the tokens have different relative, positions. So we have that. What we are saying is if you have to have fragmentation, and no one's really proposed a great solution to this, in my opinion, it's better to have it on the app level than on the protocol level. In other words, if you have it on the protocol level, you are dealing with like a fundamental incommensurability between what is going on two rollups because they are controlled by these external factors like, someone's keys. Whereas on Facet, everyone knows they're playing by the same rules. Everyone's running a node. They know that you can deal with that fragmentation, more easily because users can switch from app to app and these apps can work together. But the overall issue that you say exists on OP mainnet today because anyone can create a bridge for USDC. And if that bridge became popular, you'd have the fragmentation again. And so what you're saying is no one's actually going to do that, but you don't know that. You're just saying based on the monopoly, based on social forces, based on consensus, based on all these factors, you are really predicting its low percentage likelihood. And I'm saying if you look at Facet, what's your prediction? Like, we don't know how it's going to play out on Facet. Are there going to be 5, 10, 100, 1? We have to see, but there's no technical reason that when it comes to bridges, Facet would be any more or less, fragmented because anyone can build an equally good, validating bridge on a rollup, an Ethereum rollup. Which is not to say, it's an issue. The fragmentation thing is definitely an issue we have to deal with. I think, whether it's more giving someone a monopoly makes it less likely that there'll be fragmentation for sure. So in that regard, I think we are more vulnerable.
Ellie.
I think this is a really cool idea, and I'm just asking this question to be devil's advocate. I don't mean it in a negative way. So if you are submitting transactions to Facet through an Ethereum L1 transaction, and you kind of have the same security as the Ethereum L1, why not just use the Ethereum L1 itself?
Great question. And the reason is because when you submit a Facet transaction, all you are submitting is the inputs to the function you're trying to run. You're just submitting the data required to do that execution in dumb call data on Ethereum. The actual execution of the function happens off-chain in the using the Facet protocol. So for example, if you wanted to deploying a contract's not such a great example, but there might be like a Uniswap swap, for example, and say that swap costs 500,000 gas units. It's complicated. The L1 approach would be to actually spend 500,000 gas units in the Uniswap contracts. But the Facet approach would be you put the amount of data required to, you put the transaction data, i.e. the contract you're calling and the parameters in call data, you send it here, and that's maybe going to cost 20,000 gas units because none of the execution happens on Ethereum. So that's the thing that you are saving, which is also what happens on normal L2s. Yes, sorry. Another really important thing to say is the Facet inbox is not a smart contract. It's just a EOA burn address, basically. So it doesn't do anything with this stuff. So really it's the same as normal L2s, normal rollups actually. And the difference is on Facet, you have to pay this overhead of 21,000 gas units every single time, which is the thing that makes it bad, but it's still way better, still 10 or 20x better than doing execution on the L1. Yes, thank you, Jeremy.
Luca.
Hey, so first of all, I wanted to say that I spent some time this morning looking into Facet, and I actually added Facet to L2Beat. So like you can go, I can maybe link it already in the chat if anyone is interested. Because we introduced this new category, which is called Others, which is loosely defined on purpose to like add all the projects that either don't really fit into the current definitions that we have, or like experimental stuff. Another example is Hyperliquid that we added. In any case, I have a few questions. I'll try to prioritize. So the first thing that I don't really get from your talk is what you mean by L1 enshrined contracts, because really not like, let's pick the OpenStack since you're an OpenStack fork, right? The L1 standard bridge is not enshrined into like Optimism or Base in any way, in the sense that the L1 standard bridge is just an escrow that uses the arbitrary message bridge to like communicate to the L2 that something happened, and then they mint tokens, right? The only definition of enshrined that I can see is for the gas token, right? You need ETH to transact on Optimism, and you need to bridge ETH through a specific contract, which is the Optimism portal, right? But in Optimism today, you don't need to bridge anything to use the system. Like you could use deposit transaction, burning the gas on L1 without ever like bridging anything. So like I don't really see any difference from like what you're doing here with OpenStack, like normal OpenStack, like Optimism and Base. You can already transact on Optimism and Base without bridging anything by burning gas on L1 with deposit transaction. And the fact that anyone can build a different bridge is true for all the systems. So that's also another part that I don't fully understand. Like you can build, like Succinct could deploy an escrow for Optimism, this validated with SP1. So I don't really get the difference between like your system and another one, with the exception of the gas token that I understand. But again, you can already transact like on Optimism and Base through L1. And like apart from this, like there is a bridge like that you developed. That is the one that is described on the Altobit page, which is an EOA bridge, more or less. Like you discussed that you don't want to have, like it is not okay to have systems controlled by 15 addresses, but like the bridge that you built has one EOA that can like steal all the TVL today. So
okay, so let me respond. So I think you're wrong about a couple of things. So one, the biggest thing you're wrong about is you can't transact using forced inclusion on Optimism. According to the protocol, you can do that only when the admins have it enabled. an admin can disable forced inclusion by upgrading the contract and getting rid of it. So this is the huge thing that we're all about here, right? Which is, if an admin can disable forced inclusion, what is the value? The value is only in the case the admin is not hacked, but we are talking about hard times here. So I don't think you can depend on that. So that's like the really, really big difference is on Optimism. It is not the case that you can use forced inclusion. You can use it at the pleasure of the admins. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, because you need to call the deposit transaction on a smart contract.
Correct.
In that sense. Yeah, but like the other part that I don't fully understand is like when you say that if the bridge is hacked, you lose native assets, which I don't really believe that's true. Like even if the bridge is compromised, like you can still act as a sovereign rollup. Like there was a big discussion in the past on like the native assets are not affected by the canonical bridge if hacked, because of two things. Either you can use the system as a sovereign rollup, or you can even withdraw. Like if the value of the token of the meme coins or the NFTs is in the ledger, you could in principle withdraw such ledger on one, or continue using that as a sovereign rollup, even if the bridge is compromised.
So I didn't say that the bridge being hacked would cause native assets to go to zero. I said that the rollup being shut down causes the native assets to go to zero. And so the shutdown case is the one I'm talking about a moment ago, where the forced inclusion gets shut off, the sequencer gets shut off, and no transactions are possible at all, which is a much stronger result.
Yeah, but like if you act as a sovereign rollup, it's trivial to fork and use another contract or use another EOA for first transactions. Like if you're a sovereign rollup, you can do anything.
Sure. I mean, forking is a second order question here, though. Like anyone can fork anything at any time. And if you are really, but forking requires a lot of work. You got to say, here's the fork. This is the right fork. Social consensus. Hey, everyone, come upgrade your software. OpenSea, everyone, upgrade your software. Come actively join my fork, right? That's a lot of work. What OP mainnet admins get is the ability to nuke the rollup without causing a fork. On the current fork, people's existing software will break, will stop having transactions. So if you're saying, well, rollups can fork to save this, then sure, I agree with that. And I'm saying the downside is that's a lot of work. And also the admins have a ton of power, even if that can't happen, because they nuke the old fork, right? So in the case of normal forking, you have this old fork that can work, so it's like chaos, right? They nuke the existing fork. So yes, I think the problem is not that what forking can or cannot do. It's the problem is forking is a second order thing. The most important thing to look at is what the admins can do without anyone doing anything on the current fork. And just to respond also to the bridge thing. So our bridge is not controlled by a single EOA. I would say our bridge is absolutely not as in line with, I wish it were more like OP mainnet. It's like OP mainnet has, great bridge. We have a history of, having some leeway for bridges that don't have proofs, which is a bunch of things happening now that, don't have proofs. So we want to improve ours, really quickly, but it is a big challenge to create a proof system that works, which is why Optimism spent so long on it. And it's going to take us some time to, modify their changes to get it to work. So no, not trying to at all say that our bridge is where we want it to be, just in the same way that, 6 months ago, OP wasn't trying to say that, but it's not controlled by a single EOA. And, I appreciate being on L2Beat. Like L2Beat, again, like obviously I'm pushing back on some of your criticism now. But again, I want to say I love L2Beat. I love the work you do. It's an amazing site. Like, let's be real. Like, I'm sure people criticize it a lot. It's the only thing out there, right, that's doing this. So I want to show true love for your work on L2Beat and not push back too hard on any of this criticism, which I do appreciate. And if I'm pushing back, also I probably need to be clearer when I describe it in the first place. So thank you for that. So Just real quick, seeing in the chat, Ellie asks, FCT should, in theory, always be pegged to ETH. The price dynamic of FCT, it's interesting, right? Like, you're giving up ETH to get it, so yes, but the rate of FCT changes based on how many people are minting it at a given time. So that rate fluctuates, which affects the price, and then also the, gas price is relevant because the fee you pay per FCT is related to the gas price. But aside from those dynamics, yes, it's the only way to get it is by either buying it or burning it, and the person you buy it from burned ETH to get it. So it should be related to the price of ETH for sure.
Maybe as a quick follow-up question, maybe you could expand more on how the minting works, because you said you mint it at the gas price rate. Are you looking at literally the gas price that transaction on the L1 consumed and then minting accordingly?
No, that's a good question. It's a little confusing. So you take the call data size. So one thing is, this is not the full size of the transaction. This is the size of the facet portion of it. So maybe it's 100 gas units. FCT mint rate, this is part of the facet protocol. This has nothing to do with any rate on the L1. The facet protocol adjusts the mint rate using something analogous to the way Bitcoin does difficulty adjustments, where every 10,000 blocks it changes this based on mint activity, and then you multiply these and you get the mint. So the factors that determine the ETH price are the ETH price of this gas and the current mint rate from the facet protocol, and then you multiply these things and you get the amount of FCT. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Could you explain like the purpose of the FCT mint rate and why you want that to fluctuate?
So the idea, okay, so why does this exist at all? Because we were talking a moment ago about the optimism setup, and optimism has this forced inclusion thing, which can be disabled, but they also allow you to pay for stuff in L1 gas, and that's what we're kind of copying here. Optimism doesn't let you keep a balance, though, when you do that. And we think it's important that you keep a balance because we're going to want to pay for things using FCT, like inclusion in batches that are going to be getting into the L1. So we want FCT to have some kind of like scarcity to it, so it has some kind of sort of value notion. And that means we don't want people to just be able to like mint unlimited. And so we try to come up with a system where we would want it to be somewhat smooth and regular, so that you wouldn't see huge spikes based on demand changing. Like the rate should track that, and then it also the rate or an ingredient in the rate gets cut in half every year, like a Bitcoin style halving. So that comes into play. So the idea is have it be available enough in the early stages for people to go nuts, basically. And then as we move towards batching, as we move towards greater use cases for this token, have it be a little bit more scarce, so it holds its value and kind of represents what Ether, I guess, originally was maybe supposed to represent, which is like bottled up compute. That's what we call it, facet compute token. But it is very new right now, so we have to kind of see how it shakes out. It is live. It is not. I don't think it's listed by anyone, or maybe it is, but not surprised enough by this too. You can see it if you want to use our Explorer. This is a good way to see. You can just see top accounts and see everyone who has FCT. I don't know if you all know Block Scout, but it's actually like basically better than Etherscan. So shout out to Block Scout. Shout out to L2Beat. Like these are great resources. But anyway, it exists. You can get it using RPC stuff, and Block Scout puts that together. But there is, I don't think it's listed anywhere. It doesn't have a representation on the L1. So you would have to. Obviously not every coin on CoinGecko is on the L1, but you would have to have some kind of like. It's a little counterintuitive in that way, but it does have this wrapped FCT. It's cool, but yeah, hopefully it'll be listed.
Amazing. Tom, thank you so much for the presentation.